All righty, everybody. So welcome. I am Marguerite Rigoglioso of Seven Sisters Mystery School. And this is another interview with a wonderful priestess, sacred woman in our Priestess Dialogs for These Times series that I'm doing. Today, the purpose of this series is to bring to the fore some of the women who've been perhaps a little bit behind the scenes in some ways, but really doing a lot of personal work over the past years and decades to clear and heal themselves to a very great degree, develop some capacities of seeing and knowing and carrying wisdom and healing tools for others. And I think now is really the time for people to be, for women of this nature to be stepping up and being seen and visible, because they offer so much medicine for our time. So today I have with me Renee Stephens, who is a very beautiful holy woman. Renee has a formal degree, a Ph.D. From the California Institute of Integral Studies in California in East-West psychology. And she, for years, had her own private business helping people with weight loss and many other things. And she had a real hit podcast called Inside Out Weight Loss for many, many years. And then a number of years ago, her husband developed cancer. And then she started on this whole journey with him that came to a certain kind of a culmination back in December, when her husband Stephen crossed over to the other side. This has been a very big initiation and journey. And then, of course, everything hit with the world situation now. So I wanted to bring in Renee to, again, talk first, tell us a little bit about herself, because there's medicine in her journey. And then for her and I to have a conversation about what's going on right now. And there's much medicine that will come through. So welcome, Renee.
Hi, Marguerite. It's wonderful to be here with you, as always.
Thank you. So Renee, I just invite you to tune in a little bit and give us what I call the 5-minute university on you. What's your spiritual journey been all about? What are some of the key highlights that contain some medicine? And then we will go a little bit more into your story with Stephen, but just give us some of the background.
Okay. I've been a spiritual explorer from a very young age. I wasn't raised with a tradition of any kind, but I invited myself to all my friends' religious services. So I've been to all sorts of everything from synagogue to Episcopalian to Catholic Mass in Spanish. I've been to all of it. And because that wasn't supported in my environment, I kept it suppressed for a long time, until I had a bit of a spiritual awakening when I had an eating disorder in my teens and early 20s. And I got involved in the 12-step program, Overeaters Anonymous. And there, because the first step is admitting that we're powerless and handing it over to God, that really opened me up. But I shortly after went to business school. I got my MBA. There I met my husband in London. And I really suppressed those aspects of myself thoroughly, because I had made a financial commitment. I'd made a big commitment to this life, more conventional life in the business world. And it wasn't until I had a couple of health crises later in my 20s and 30s with chronic fatigue syndrome, that I was forced to really awaken. Those crises were a gift of awakening me, because that's what it took to heal. And I discovered neurolinguistic programming around that time, and immediately had an epiphany that my life's work was of a very different nature than what I had previously thought. That it has to do with my spiritual journey and with healing myself and others. And through that training and my work with clients, I worked with clients for many years. I discovered that the most important thing for me is to do my own work so that I can help others. And that my life itself, the issues that come up for me personally, the challenges that I experience, it's essential that I heal them in myself so that I can later teach others. So when my husband became ill in 2015, he was first diagnosed with cancer, I immediately became unable to work with my clients and continue my work as a healer and as a coach. And that's really started my journey, I would say.
Yeah, boy, I remember that. That was really quite striking. It was like all of a sudden, everything just dissolved. And then you were in this chaotic kind of hell space for a number of years that you're really just emerging out of, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. So let's tune in as to, I think what I'd like you to do is share. And I witnessed and to some degree participated with you and Stephen, and I want to really honor Stephen now, because I feel his spirit very strongly. I've mentioned this to you, in various ceremonies that I've done. And whenever I tune into him, he's like, thank you so much for kicking some sense into me. That was his first message when I went into ceremony, and I had called you at that time, where he's like, wow, I get it now, but it was quite the journey. And I think there's a lot of medicine for people in hearing about some of the highlights and learnings that you experienced in that journey with him that are applicable for the now, where there is so much fear of death, where people's core wounds are getting stimulated, whether they are conscious of it or not. A time when we are going through nothing less than the dimensional shift from third into fourth and fifth dimensions. Let's have you go into this story now with the idea of what it might bring to others.
All right.
Okay.
Feel free to stop me if I go on too long, but this journey with my husband, I had no idea when it started. When he was first diagnosed, all I knew was that I was unable to continue my work. Everything in my world fell apart. And over the course of the 4 years of his illness, when I say everything, I mean my whole identity fell apart.
It was the proverbial dissolution, dismemberment.
It was a complete dismemberment, exactly. I should say that our love was really a great romantic love that Stephen and I shared. We were very much in love for our whole relationship. We have 2 beautiful children, and we were very connected, but there was always a shadow side that came out. At one point, it came out very publicly on a reality TV show that was sort of a precursor to what later happened. But Stephen, when he was first diagnosed, he wanted to be positive. And so he wouldn't let any negative talk. I wasn't allowed to say the word cancer. He wanted me to say reknak, which is cancer backwards. I wasn't allowed to share any doubt. And he was given the treatment that he underwent had an over 90% cure rate. So we assumed that he would be cured, even though it was a horrendous treatment.
Right? It was a throat
It,
cancer.
it was a throat cancer, yeah. It started in his tonsil. And radiation and chemotherapy. He went through the first rounds of that, and it took him a year to recover. He really struggled, lost a lot of weight. And during that time, I then was no longer, because he said nothing negative, I wasn't allowed to share with him my fear. The fact that I was terrified of losing him. He was my grounding. He was my my biggest supporter. He had great faith in me. He was my security. He was very capable in the material world. He built these beautiful homes. He brought in financial security for us. And suddenly I wasn't able to share with him that I was actually terrified of losing him. And that began a schism for us, where it's like there was a big boulder put in the middle of the stream, and my stream went one direction and his went the other. He then recovered, and I still wasn't able to work, and we thought he was fine. He got a clean bill of health. For about a year and a half, we both thought that that was that. But now there were already some inklings where I was not feeling as aligned with him. He was excellent at logic and rationality. He was a hard worker. He really represented kind of a left brain powerhouse to me. He was very intelligent and a very strong personality. And I started to notice during that time how strongly he would enforce his will, that it was kind of his way or the highway, that, we were going to go on this vacation, we were going to do this, and there wasn't a lot of room for dissent. And he'd always had that personality. He had always been kind of dominant. But the other aspects of his personality meant that I didn't pay attention to his shadow, because the love was there, the adventure was there, the fun was there. And so I made that trade-off, not really consciously, because it's a trade-off that my mother made with my father, that her mother before her made, and I believe many generations back made. It was, I will put myself second to the will of this strong man, to the will of almost to the patriarchy. And then, so I noticed that at the time, but I just carried on, because what it would represent to cross him, to stand up to him, was so terrifying to me. I would never have done it voluntarily. My whole world, it represented the crumbling of my whole world. So I let him, have his say and be dominant, as he would be. And then he was re-diagnosed. We were shocked. We were on vacation, on an active vacation, a cycling vacation in Europe. And he started having trouble digesting his food, and he ended up having emergency surgery. He had a new growth in his intestine, and then began phase 2, sort of the knockout round of his journey. And he became, because I believe he was so terrified of his own mortality, because he was an atheist, and he was a strident atheist. He believed that death meant annihilation. And I think that he was absolutely terrified of his annihilation. And so the positive, the fun, the laughter that we used to share, the adventure, the being active, the hiking, the cycling, the building things that we used to enjoy so much together, all faded away. All of those, the silly part of his personality, all of that was repressed. And now it was, the all shadow show, all shadow all the time. And there was one, I was driving into a medical appointment, of which there were, of course, many. And we get in the car and he starts criticizing my driving. And why aren't you in this lane? And why aren't you, I take this way. And the criticism just kept going. And it got to a point where there was this one moment where I picked him up. I drove the car around to pick him up, and he gets in the car and he says, in that way that he did, this sort of dismissive smirk, like, obviously you were never a taxi driver because you would know to pull up closer to where I was. In other words, like, so he wouldn't have to take 3 steps. And that was my personal tipping point. And I had been counseled by my beloved advisor and mentor, Dr. Robert McDonald, on how I needed to change my behavior. And the stakes were, I want to say that the stakes, to my view, could not have been higher. Because how dare I counter him in any way when he was struggling for his life? How dare I speak up for myself? How dare I demand to be treated with respect when he was fighting for his life? Couldn't I see that he might die, I might lose him? And yet, I myself, through the effort of keeping that down, was dying.
Yeah.
I was wishing that I were dead. And then I developed symptoms. I ended up I bled for a month. I had 3 different biopsies. And I got to a point where I had to make a choice. I thought, okay, well, if he lives, then I can die, because it's not worth living like this. I feel so awful about myself. And I had to make a choice then if I wanted to live. And I found that will to live within myself, and knew then that if I wanted to live, I had to start standing up for myself, even though the stakes were what they were. And even though he made sure that I knew the level of betrayal that what I was doing represented. And so what was I doing? So when he would start criticizing me, I couldn't say, stop that. I couldn't engage in conversation with him because he was such a master of language and argument, or I was so in my own deer in the headlights state that I could never get out of that. I just went immediately into, like, my brain fell out of my head, and I'm just like, nothing I can do. So Robert counseled me. He said, look, what you do when someone starts to criticize you is you walk away. Very simple. You just walk away. So I'm behind the wheel. He started in on me on this occasion about how I could never have been a taxi driver because I don't know how to pick up a passenger. And then it continues. And I just said to him, ouch, that hurts. And he just took that as an attack. And as we were driving from San Francisco to Marin, we're on the Golden Gate Bridge, and it escalates. The next thing you know, he is swearing at me, telling me I wish I had driven myself. This is just awful. And I pulled off the road. I stopped the car and I said, okay, if you want to drive yourself, go ahead. So I got out of the car. I said, you can drive yourself. I was left by the side of the road. He sped off, screeching his wheels in his rage, and I took the bus home. And that's where it began.
I want to just add into here that I think this is a scenario, or representative of a scenario, that a lot of people are feeling right now. The how dare you speak what your truth is about the larger issues of what's might be going on, and perhaps not be in agreement with the denial around the deeper issues that are happening when, quote, people are dying.
Exactly.
Okay, so just to show the relevance to your personal story to this larger, and then I think it's going to be very interesting to hear the story of how you move through the rest of this, and then the death passage, and where you've come to, what are you understanding now about life and death, this death passage, because again, I feel like there is a lot of medicine for people at this time when death fears are so strong. And
Yeah.
whether it's even a death, truly death reality to the extent that they're saying or not, the fears are up. We are facing our mortality. And I also want to bring in the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, people's core wounds are unconsciously getting stimulated, deeply buried things,
Yeah.
okay, that may be even deeper than their own personal psychological material, that might have to do with deeper levels of cultural trauma or past life trauma or even off-planet trauma or whatever.
Yeah.
And it seems like Stephen kind of, went into this flip. And of course, we are honoring him now because we know that he went through a learning journey. He's still going through it on the other side.
Yeah.
We went through a learning journey. We are blessing him for this knowledge and this, once we broke through the barrier of his actually crossing over to the other side, like, oh, it is finished, as the famous individual once said, it's like once the quote worst happens, then you can see, what is actually happening. So, okay, that's to bring it to relevance today. Let's get back to this story, how you're now in this constant negative reality with him. It's kind of a hell realm that's lasting for a couple of years.
Yeah.
What happened? What happened in that? And then bring us to when it was clear that he was going to really leave his body.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Marguerite. And I really appreciate what you're saying, because it is so parallel to what we're going through now with the fear of death and being faced with this idea of annihilation, because that's what we were facing.
Yeah.
So it continued. For me personally, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done, to stand up to him and to walk away when I felt criticized and insulted, which was often because he was under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
I also want to say, in terms of honoring Stephen, that what he put me through was such a gift, in terms of, I would never have chosen this path. I would never have, I was happy in my ignorance of the fact that I was a woman in of many generations of my line being, in a way, emotionally abused by a man. I was happy in my ignorance. I wasn't going to rock the boat. It would be too scary. And there were compensating delights of it. So, but this journey forced it. And I believe that Steve and I probably had a soul level agreement that he would help me in this way. So,
yes. And one thing that became so clear in the medicine journey I did after his crossing is that he had a soul agreement with you. You had a soul agreement with him.
Yeah.
This was the soul agreement to dissolve the karma.
Yes.
That had bound you for lifetimes in this cycle of male, female imbalance, etc. And
exactly
the
right.
wounds that were underneath that very deeply, both for the feminine and for the masculine.
And that's what I would invite people listening to consider, is that however difficult their challenge might be, that at this time in particular, I believe there's an opportunity for dissolving karma.
Yeah.
If we look inside, and if we find our own shadows, and if we choose love.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Because
Choosing love.
he kept choosing love. I would observe, and we would have these conversations where, okay, there's choices. You could leave him, you could divorce him. You could give him the cold freeze, you could whatever, have a hissy fit, da da da. But you kept doing what Robert was guiding you to do, which was to stand firm, when
That's
absolutely
right.
right, walk away, but keep
Yes,
coming back, walk
that's right.
away. Because it wasn't, okay, it was to some degree abuse. He wasn't physically hitting you,
No,
thankfully. I would not be advising people to come back into that kind of an
no.
environment. But you knew that something else was going on.
Yes,
Some people, it is their path to walk away. For you, and people use their intuition, no, it's not. It wasn't your path to walk away. It was to keep coming back and grounding into love and enduring and going through this to the other side with courage.
that's right. That's exactly right. So, you know, just to continue the story, that pattern continued then. So I changed my behavior, and I'd say, I'm going to walk away. I will return. I emphasized to him that I loved him, and I would do that repeatedly over and over. I would walk away, which absolutely flipped him out, and he would escalate and escalate how serious my betrayal had been. He felt deeply betrayed and abandoned during his most vulnerable time by me walking away. And he really felt that it was unforgivable, that how could I walk away from him in his moment of greatest need. And part of me believes that. Part of me, that frankly, that's still a piece that I'm working through the tail end of now, absolving myself of the guilt for that I did betray. I broke the rules in
Right.
our relationship. The rules were that if it really upset him, I wouldn't do it. Doesn't matter what I felt about what was necessary for me. If he was upset, it was my fault.
Yeah.
That's the way I saw it. My job was to make him happy, and to subjugate myself to do that was just, I didn't even think about it. It was just natural, because I had learned that from my mother, who learned it from her mother, and so forth. So I changed the rules. I broke all the rules, and I started walking away. And his sense of betrayal, of anger at me, grew so extreme that one day, as you know, he was getting sicker but still pursuing all these alternative treatments, experimental treatments in other countries. We went for a walk by the water, and he told me in the kindest possible way that he was going to disinherit me. He was going to make sure that about 45% of what we had, you know, almost his entire thing, was not going to go to me. And that was such a blow to me, because financial security is a huge part of my sense of security. And it was terrifying. And I had advisors telling me to consult lawyers. And I have had in the past spiritual teachers and guides telling me to divorce him, to leave him, because he was abusive emotionally, not physically. Narcissistic was used by one of my very beloved teachers, because narcissism was definitely there. I personally, I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but for me, I chose to stay. And so, you know, in a way I called his bluff, because I decided, after advice, I think from you, Marguerite, and others, and really looking inside, I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to be fine. Even if he disinherits me, I'll be fine. And so I wasn't scared by that. I was scared, but I decided to stay anyway, even if he did that. And there was a time, his last time in the hospital, and he was going to be discharged to go home and go into hospice. And I crawled up on the hospital bed with him, and I curled up on the bed with him, knowing things had been difficult between us. And I just wanted to hug him, you know, and there's still wires, you know, and tubes coming out of him. And so I'm cuddling him on the hospital bed, and he relaxes for a moment and then starts to tell me how awful I've been. He said, you know, and I can't believe the way you betrayed me, and so on and so forth. And I just said, Stephen, stop. I said, my love for you is here now. Right now. It's present right now. I'm here cuddling you on the bed in the hospital. And that finally shut him up, because he finally was surrendering his battle to survive and acknowledging that he was vanquished, that that hope was diminishing. And he stayed quiet then, and we just enjoyed that moment. And then he went home, he entered hospice. He was still hoping to go back into chemo. He only went into hospice thinking that he could come out of hospice if he could somehow be strong enough to endure another round of chemo. And finally, about 5 days before he passed, when it became clear to him that there was no hope, it was only at that time, only when, because he was a warrior spirit, only when he had put down his sword and taken off his armor and allowed himself to rest, that his heart started to open and the healing started to happen. And I curled into bed with him one day, and he said, he whispered to me, because he couldn't speak at that point, he said, Renee, I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did. He said, I couldn't see it before because I was too busy fighting. But now I can put myself in your shoes and I understand. And that was such a gift to me before he died, that he could say that. It felt like forgiveness.
Yeah.
And, you know, shortly thereafter, he passed. We had a beautiful ceremony. It was planned because he chose to take the medications to end his life, but had he not, he would have passed very shortly thereafter. And my friends who were in ceremony in the house at that time saw his spirit so happy. And then, Marguerite, you went into ceremony just a couple days later. I think it was that Saturday. He passed on a Wednesday. On that Saturday, you were in ceremony in New York, and you called me and you said, Stephen is here.
Yeah.
You want to share what Stephen said to you?
Yes.
Remember?
I'm going to share a few things about that. And I want to go back to what you said about this is also, I think, a medicine point for everyone, especially at this time where we are being challenged to the max. We are being invited to be in love always and for everything. And sometimes to have that initiation, we are given the thing that for us is the most terrifying, that will tell us, I can't continue to love through this. And for you, it was that whole financial security piece, right?
That's right. That was it.
I continue to love through this. And yet, your higher self kept bringing you back to love. And you didn't know what the outcome was going to be. Was he going to change the will? Have time? He might have, you know, You just trusted. And when released that fear, kept going back into love, and the way it worked out was the way it worked out. And I think so many of us are getting these tests right now.
Yeah.
Family members are bouncing off the walls and reacting in certain ways to different stressors that touch on their core wounds, unconscious. And then we have the opportunity. Am I going to keep loving? Am I going to keep loving? Or am I going to go into opposition? Am I going to go into argumentation? Am I going to go into fight? Am I going to go into intellectualizing my list of what's wrong, Or am I going to go, who? Mother Mary, or whoever your guide is, please come and help me. And just ground into the love, like I know something bigger is going on here. I'm going to ground into the love. So that's what you kept doing at every single stage. And there were a couple of ceremonies that were happening for me. One was before he passed, I think, where we saw there were some messages already coming from his higher self that were kind of giving you permission in all of this. I'd have to go back and see what it was, because the main thing that sticks is actually about a month later. And I wasn't even thinking of Stephen when I was doing the ceremony, but all of a sudden it was like, oh, hi, Steve. You know? And yeah, I know our thing is a little glitchy here, but I was like, wow, hi, Stephen, here you are. And basically he said, thank you, the two of you, for having, his words were, knocked some sense into me. And he meant it in a kind of a funny way. And basically he said that because we both, and especially you, Renee, held the grounding and held the love and did not abandon him, even though his worst absolute shadows were showing up consistently over a long, hellish period of time. Because you stayed in love all the way through to the end, the karma was able to release. If you had gotten into opposition, breaking apart from him, you would have continued the cycle that went on from these other lives. You would have had to have gone through another whole life of this stuff. Now he's liberated and you're liberated. And he said, thank you so much for holding that space. You were courageous beyond what I even knew and understand. I see what a tremendous gift you gave to me of holding your love, even though it was, you know, you weren't like Mother Mary the whole entire time. You were sometimes pretty annoyed, scared, disgusted, out of love, whatever it was. But you held and stayed by him through this passage. The karma got released. He's free. Everything that had led up to all of the wounds that he was repeating and that he repeated in the scenario that he played in that reality show have been released now. And so now he can go on and be a guide for you on the other side. And he's released you from any obligations that you were feeling that you needed to measure up to him and you needed to be this builder and this big real estate mogul or whatever. He's like, honey, do what you need. Do what gives you joy. Do what you want, you know. That's what I'm remembering. Are there other pieces that you're remembering that stick out that are medicine?
Yeah, well, I think I really appreciate that. I want to just emphasize a couple points. One is that no, I was no saint through this. I spent time as the victim, as the abusee, as I blamed him. I was grumpy about him. I was not always, you know, I was definitely not the picture of love for great sections of time. And we had the advantage, we had done ceremony with Stephen because he opened up as humbled by the cancer, where we saw that his soul wasn't that sure that it wanted to stick around. And I had kind of known that in a way early on, and that his soul wanted to learn. And I believe that the passage through death was the healing. The death of his body was part of the healing of his soul.
Absolutely. The healing only could come when he released his body.
Only.
It started the week or so, whatever, the 2 weeks when it was clear that he was going to be releasing his body. He was able to finally indicate the startings of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then when he passed and he was on the other side, and it's like, whoa, hi. He's like, yeah, I'm liberated and this is the real healing.
Because he did not, on the other side, he no longer had the very real survival fears of the physical body.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted there was a question that came to me that was a gift to me because I've heard it from teachers. That time when I crawled onto the hospital bed with him and he started attacking me, the question that I was given that made all the difference to me at that time was, can I love this too?
Absolutely.
Can I love his blaming? Can I love his fear? Can I love his lashing out? And the answer was, of course.
Yeah.
Because I loved him so deeply.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's not part of the standard narrative when you have a husband who has that kind of personality.
Yeah.
But I really did love him. And so I had the gift, because we knew his more approximate time of death, because we knew when he was going to take those substances, I was able to be on the bed with him, holding his hand as he transitioned, with our 2 children there, my friends elsewhere in the house, holding ceremony. I was able to love him through the end. Sorry, it's very emotional for me.
Yeah.
And that taught me, Marguerite, that the lesson that to me is making this pandemic, this reorganization, this rebirth that's happening right now on the planet, it's making it so much easier for me, because I see people in fear. I see beloved friends and family of mine in tremendous fear. I don't feel that fear personally. I'm not afraid of the virus because of the experience I had early on. But I keep asking myself, can I love this too? Can I love the fear? Can I love the, you know, the political leaders who are flailing or who are blaming? And the more that I ask that question, the more that I challenge myself to love this too, to love, to not oppose the dark things that are happening on, but to forgive and love them. That to me is the portal of transformation.
Absolutely.
That is what is that is the opportunity for each of us today. And it is as hard for people who have been light workers and priestesses and, you know, bankers and builders and, you know, candlestick makers. It's as hard for any human as it is for any other. No one gets it easier. It is terrifying and difficult. And I believe that's also the portal, the opportunity that we have to ask, can we love this too?
Yes. And what I want to add is that because I also know you and witnessed your loving Stephen in that moment when you were embracing him and he was bringing up his shadow that felt so abusive. Can I love this too? Underneath or behind that was, yes, because, not just because I love him, I love myself. You see, it was that rock iron core that you were developing of self-love this whole time, because you are an intelligent woman, you are a spiritual woman, you are a strong woman. It's almost like this was an illusionary experience to kind of test this. So you were not coming at it as somebody without sufficient ego strength, who was very vulnerable and giving yourself away, because that is something that can happen, right? So that's why some people need to set a different boundary, because they're still developing that ego strength and that self-love, and they cannot do it in the maelstrom of the force that's going on right then. But you could. And that's because of all the spiritual work you had been doing and were continuing to do throughout this time. This is why the self-love is so important. It is a cornerstone. It is an anchor. You know, it is a rock, and it is actually the point and the purpose, because it is more and more and more challenging to love other people unconditionally, even through their shadow, when we don't love ourselves. And so the two kind of work in a figure eight, and it's never perfect. But the more we come into this self-love and do the things we need to do, and I know that the inner child work is something you've been doing, it's something I've been doing, you know, with our blessed therapist, Deborah Morris, who's been so helpful in that, you know, and there are others. But that inner child work, and that Hal and Sidra Stone, they call it voice dialogue therapy. You know, it's just one version of it that helps you find the fragmented inner parts and inner children and just love them and love them and love them into wholeness, so that then you can stay strong when that energy starts coming at you. So we are at that time in the world now where so many energies are coming at us from family, loved ones, friends, people on Facebook, the culture at large. And as those of us who step out and start saying, hey, there's an alternative narrative, and wow, everybody's stuff starts coming at you. It's about continuing that grounding of loving self, continuing to develop that again through connection with Mother Divine, Father Divine, Mother Earth, Mother Mary, Christ and Master, whoever your masters are, that you can call on as help. Okay? That's what is, I think, part of the initiatory path that we're all going through right now. So yours is a microcosmic precursor, right? That's why we wanted to talk about your story today. And this is really the first time you're publicly sharing it, you know, because there is so much medicine. So let me just check in. It feels like we're kind of coming to a completion. Does it feel like a completion for you? Is there more that you would like to share in this?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Marguerite. I just want to agree with you, calling out that point that yes, we have to do our own work. I had been practicing through this walking away, through having really looked inside and chosen life and decided that I was worth standing up for, to be able to get to that point, to ask that question in the hospital bed, can I love this too? If I had not, frankly, spent years looking at my own shadow, doing my own healing work, I wouldn't have been in a position to do that. And that, I think, is the opportunity for all of us, is to look at what is bugging us in the external world in kind of a way that Ho'oponopono asks one to do. You know, if we get mad at the politicians, if we get mad at whatever's happening out there, if we get mad at our family members because they're so awful, it's an opportunity to look back and say, well, what part of me does that correspond to? With Stephen, you know, he was, you know, he was mean. Frankly, he could be an asshole. But I had to look at myself, well, wait a minute, I'm the one who participated in this all these years. I can't blame him, because we did this together. You know, I'm as much a part of it as he is. And then to say, well, what is there in me to heal? What is there in me to love? The part of me that thinks that I should be treated this way, for example. And to get out of the blaming and into finding the part of ourself that needs love and opening up to love. And just by asking, it will come in. We ask Mother Mary, we ask our guides, we ask God, we ask whatever it is for us, and it comes. Absolutely. Every time. So I really appreciate you bringing out that point. And this forum, I have not shared this journey with anyone. And I didn't plan to do it today, but here it is. So thank you.
Here it is.
Yeah.
And I thank you, because it feels like a big healing also for me. And I think for many people who will be watching this video. And what we need are to share our stories and our medicine right now. And that's part of what's going to get us through it, this situation, because there's nothing perfect and we're really being challenged. There's a lot of gnarly stuff within and outside of us. And it looks different for every person according to our soul lessons. You know, we're in multiple different realities. And sometimes the issue is, can we breach or bridge through realities when this person believes that all of our problems are being caused by this one believes it's by that, each one thinks the other is crazy. This is a lot of what's going on right now. So love is the thing that allows, even if I think that person's crazy, can I still love them?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
This is this paradoxical initiation that's going on. Okay. Again, it's different from, quote, accepting abuse, but that even concept starts dissolving more and more as you do the self-love practices. You're not even in that place anymore. You're just so strong. You don't even need the anger to set the boundary, you know, as this process goes on and on. So we are just sending many blessings to everybody watching this. May they receive and experience the medicine. May it strengthen them so that they can share their own particular medicine with other people, and we can keep that daisy chain going. Are there any last words from you, Renee?
I just want to thank you, Marguerite. You were a part of the whole evolution for me. You have been a role model as a priestess for me, and the ceremonies that you guided me through and Stephen and I through were a big part of the healing, which is why, of course, he came through you after he passed and said, you know, made that joke that I just love, because he was not a priestess kind of guy. He was Mr. Left Brain, atheist, rational. And afterwards he came through and he said, of course I would come through, Marguerite. You're not going to be anyone else.
I know. And of course he said it with a British accent because he was British. Of course I would come through Marguerite. And I was just, it was strange because while we were going through the lived experience, while he was in his body, occasionally, you know, as I said to you, occasionally I'd flash like, oh my gosh, I wonder if Stephen's ever going to come to me in spirit form. This is too scary of a thought. You know, I'm not, I don't even know if I'm good enough to be able to see him. And then boom, without me even thinking about it, he was coming in. And not only that, but what I'll maybe conclude with is this: he was so grateful that he gave me a healing on my womb at the time, because this was part of the womb healing that I was going through. I had a mass on my ovary, and he was giving me this kind of energy, which contributed to this. It was part of this miraculous healing with Mother Mary and some other forces, the dissolving of this mass on my ovary. So it was like one hand washes the other, you know. He was reaching back from the other side, and it was uncanny. You know, it was, if I had not been in as open a medicine state, I might have not believed it or thought that I was making it up. But because I was in such an open state, it's like, oh, this is real, all right, this is happening. Yeah. And of course, that was a further initiation into my priestess path, you know. So it was like everything was working together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to honor that. I also want to mention that I am sitting here today in the house that he built for us, what he considered his greatest, most beautiful achievement. And it is at the base of beautiful Mount Tamalpais. And I just want to thank him for this beautiful space. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for this journey together, which continues. All right. Well, with that, everybody, we will conclude this particular Priestess Dialogue. And just thanks again, Renee, for being courageous enough to share your story today. And we will see you all for the next Priestess Dialogue. Goodbye for now.